Passo adesso in inglese, gentili signore e signori, cari colleghi. As director of the Academia Belgica, I would like to welcome you all to this first exclusively online event of the Academia. And given the actual situation, I'm rather afraid that, and sure too, that it won't be the last one. Actually, as you can see, I'm talking to you from Brussels, whereas Sadi Marichal is in the Academia right now. So it's a bit a topsy-turvy world. And I suppose that we will stay in this topsy-turvy world for a while. And indeed, before turning to today's conference subject, I would like to stress the fact that the Academia Belgica, whatever the situation will be in the coming months, will continue to offer, or at least will try as much as possible to offer scientific content as it is its duty, if not in the institution itself, at least through newsletters, events online like this one, and even soon podcasts. But let's turn now to today's event, Tavola Rotonda, organized by archaeologist and postdoctoral researcher attached to the Ghent University, Sadi Marichal. Specializing in Roman Mediterranean archaeology, Dr. Marichal worked for many years on Roman bath culture. First on the one in the Iberian Peninsula for his master thesis, and more specifically on bath culture in Amaya, excavated by an international team, including Ghent University. And I would like to say hello on this occasion to Professor Frank Vermeulen, who joined us, as I can see. Then, after a research there, actually at the Academia Belgica in Rome, and therefore I think that Dr. Marichal knows our institution well, rather well, he focused on the evolution of public bath and bathing habits in the late antiquity in the framework of his PhD, with a focus lay on the Italian peninsula, North Africa, and the Middle East. The result of this study has recently been published as a monograph in the Late Antique Archaeology Supplementary Series, edited by Luc Lavant at Brill. And it is precisely on this topic of late Roman bath culture, and on the occasion of this outstanding publication, that today's workshop has been organized. And as in Dr. Marichal's book, the discussion will consider the survival, transformation, and eventual decline of Roman public bath and bath habits at that period. We are thereby very pleased to welcome, in addition, of course, of Dr. Marichal himself, Dottoressa Francesca Carboni, who worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the Ghent University and is now attached at the Newcastle University, Dr. Nathalie de Haan, assistant professor at the Radboud University Nijmegen, Professoressa Francesca Romana Stassola o Stassola?
Stassola.
Stassola, ecco, scusami. Associate Professor of Christian and Medieval Archaeology at La Sapienza, Professor Paolo Barese, Associate Professor of Classical Archaeology at the Università Corre di Enna, and last, but certainly not least, Professor Emeritus Patrizio Bensabene from La Sapienza in Rome. On the behalf of the Academia Belgica, I would like to thank you all for the privilege to host you today. And I would like now to pass, as I can say so, the floor to Dr. Marichal, even if it's not really a floor. Dr. Marichal, I will be very pleased to hear more of your subject now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Director, and thank you again for hosting this event online, and thank you also to the entire staff of the Academia Belgica, who supported me also during my PhD, and this book is also largely thanks to the fantastic institution that is the Academia Belgica that this book came about. I will now gladly pass the word to my former colleague and actually member of my PhD jury, Francesca Carboni, who, as Professor van Sprengel already said, has now a position at Newcastle University, but has also worked on the baths of Trajan in Rome. Please, Francesca, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know it sounds a bit weird that I'm Italian and I'm now in Rome, speaks in English, but this choice has been made by the organizer in order to balance the different language used in the intervention and make this roundtable more comprehensible for to a wider public. Italian auditors have not much to worry since my strong native accent will make my words really comprehensible for them, while they may sound difficult to native English people. First of all, I want to say that I feel very honored to present the book of Sadi Maréchal. As he told, we have been colleagues for several years at Ghent University. And I followed, more than I followed, maybe I can say, I really attended the progress of Sadi's doctoral thesis, which has been conveyed in the book published by Brill, which is the sixth of the late antique archaeology series edited by Professor Luc Lavanne. It has already been said that although I'm not research associate at Newcastle University within the Rome Transport Project, I feel I'm here introducing the book of Sadi as a previous member of the Roman Mediterranean Archaeology Unit in the Department of Archaeology of Ghent University. And I am particularly grateful for that to Professor Frank Vermeulen, who was the promoter of Sadi's thesis research and the supervisor of the postdoc research project that I conducted there. For this reason, I would have been delighted to be alongside Sadi in the Accademia Belgica, that seat that is so important for Belgian scholars and also for those who are related to Belgium as I am. So I started to share my screen. I'm doing that. Okay. To introduce the book, I start to say that this is a volume, a big volume of 3 pages, so with an important illustrative apparatus consisting of 140 illustrations, more than 40 maps, 13 graphics, and 1 table. The purpose, topic, and structure of the book cannot be misunderstood. They are clearly explained by the author in the introductory chapter, and I found them perfectly highlighted already in the title. The focus of the book lies on public baths, following a Nielsen definition. So public baths means namely those baths that were accessible to everyone, whether they were owned by the city or the state or by a private individual. Also from the title, we can understand the original character of this study, that it does not only aim to investigate the architectural and technological evolution of the bathhouse as a building, but also the possible changes in bathing habits. As it is often stressed by Sadi Maréchal all over the pages, his work does not aim to give an exhaustive overview of all late antique baths so far discovered. The main purpose was rather to assemble a representative sample of the literary, epigraphic, and archaeological evidence of late antique baths in order to write, and this I found very important, these are words of Sadi, a cultural history of Mediterranean bathing habits. And the approach was that of longue durée approach. So Sadi Maréchal made the choice to study several Roman regions instead of concentrating upon a single province or city. And this, although such a vast topic imposed some obvious restrictions in terms of geographical and chronological frameworks. The regions concerned from the study in the study are North Africa, Italy, with a special focus on Rome and Ostia, and Palestine. And this gave Sadi Maréchal the opportunity to obtain a better picture of the connectivity that existed in the Mediterranean during the long period concerned. And as the author writes, each region represents a certain tradition within the Roman Empire. The Italian peninsula as the Roman heartland, North Africa as prosperous provinces in the Western Mediterranean, and the Cyrenaica, Egypt, and Palestine as the rich provinces in the eastern part of the empire. The period concerned instead lies between AD 285 and AD 700. It means from the end of the so-called crisis of the 3rd century to the whole 7th century. If the choice of the start date seems straightforward, the final one seems to consider late antiquity in its longest definition. But without entering this debate, Sadi Maréchal writes that the final date was chosen with the Islam conquest of North Africa in mind. Indeed, by including the second half of the 7th century, it has been possible for him to observe how the Roman-style bath of North Africa and the Middle East survived the past decades of Muslim rule. The structure of the book has been shaped by a logical deconstruction of the main research question, also allowing the reader to consult the body of evidence by source, written or archaeological, as well as by region. So everything seems to be very clear and above all, very well explained at the beginning of every section, in the introduction and at the beginning of every chapter. This is the first part of the table of content, and and this is the introduction I've talked to you about, where Sadi Maréchal explained the reason behind some choices that he made and that I have just explained to you. The actual first chapter concerns a short introduction to Roman baths, with a special focus on modern research in this field. The different parts addressed bathing several topics like bathing itinerary, bathing technology, the water management, the functioning of the heating system, and so on. And this chapter is concluded, that is really an introduction, is concluded by an overview of the earlier research on late antique baths. The two following chapters concerns instead the evidence that have been used for this research. And all types of sources have been included, although this book does not present an exhaustive list of all available texts and inscriptions or all available archaeological evidence. The first chapter about sources concern written evidence, like ancient literary texts, juridical corpora, inscription, and what is very interesting and somehow original, but not, of course, linked to the Egypt and this particular region. There is a good use of papyri for baths in ancient Egypt. The third chapter instead is dedicated to the archaeological evidence. There are a number of urban cases that are discussed, and they have been selected on the basis of the ones with a better evidence. They resulted in a list of 8 cities, the ones that I have highlighted, spread across the different regions which have been discussed in more detail. Of course, the actual architectural structure of late antique baths was the very important evidence. And the research was not only restricted to newly built baths, but also to the ones built during the High Empire that were still in use, sometimes with important changes in the original plans. Then there are differences of topics dealt with in the different regions or city in particular, because for example, for Rome, there are special sections dedicated to baths that are represented on the forma orbis Rome, or for example, for it's not, there are differences regarding above all Rome, because of course this is a city that that needed a special attention. It has been stressed by the author himself, but it's clear from the reading of the book that this study is the result of a bibliographical survey, complemented with some on-site observation. And when there are on-site observation, they are very acute, very important. But I can testify also that study started with the best intention regarding possible inspections, especially in North Africa. But the beginning of his thesis coincided with the worsening of the political situation in some areas of North Africa and the Middle East, and this for this there was the impossibility for study to access many of these sites. I'm thinking, for example, about Libya. We can say that study was not facilitated by the events when he started his research, a bit as he has now, for different causes, due to a different kind of war regarding the launch of the book. The fourth chapter is really the chapter dedicated to the discussion. And it consists really in the discussion of the evidence from the previous chapters, combined to answer general research questions about the evolution of late antique baths. Among the main issues covered there, you find a summary on how changed the plans of baths, the size of baths, different, which were the different room of baths in different periods. It has been observed the absence of certain of these rooms and the transformation of others in terms of shape and use. There is a special focus on the recurring element of the single person pools with a resume of the main theories that have tried to explain this change from a breakdown of the water supply system and the drop in number of the served communities, recording also Genovese's theory according to which small pools were the result of an evolution in bathing habits, facilitating the use of different types of water or of water of different temperature. The conclusion of the author is that there is not one single explanation for the small pools in late antique baths. It was an architecture feature that could be used for different purposes, but whatever its function, the author cannot deny that the use of this pool must have been a more private experience, certainly in contrast to the communal pools. What I personally found very interesting in this section is the part dedicated to the privatization of the bathing habits. And here you can find, you can read the issue of semi-public baths that are so evident in the well-preserved baths of North Africa, but not only, and an issue that has already been addressed by the author in other articles. After the discussion, there is a gazetteer of late antique Roman style baths, and this includes for each region not only the newly built late antique baths, but also the high imperial baths with the late antique phase. And of course, also here, there are differences and different topics presented for the different regions. For example, for baths in North Africa, there were, sorry, I would like to go ahead. For baths in North Africa, there is this section dedicated to villa baths with a possible public use, and also for southern Italy. For baths in Egypt, for example, there is a section dedicated to ecclesiastical baths, and so on, because there are different topic addressed for every region. One of the strengths of the book that I find is its clarity, and also the provision of numerous lists, graphics, and also appendixes. There are two appendixes, one for the inscriptions, one for the papyri, describing late antique baths. And one really strong point are the illustrations that all scholars interested in this topic will find very useful. Although most of the figures are borrowed from earlier publications, practically all the plans were re-examined and updated and reproduced following a key, specially created to present a uniform and clear corpus of plans for easy comparisons. There is always the scale is always the same, or almost always the same, and this is really I have already experienced that can facilitate the comparison among the plans and in general. Also, the general maps showing the location of the different archaeological sites and the inscriptions have uniform layout, making use of the same key. I leave Sadi to highlight the main remarks emerged from his book. I can say for sure it has produced a kind of very useful corpus of late antique public baths, although it is limited to the concerned regions. And I'm sure that this will be of incredibly valuable use for all the scholars that will deal with that kind of Roman buildings. I, for myself, can admit that during the last years, while I was conducting archival research, I have found much more structures that might be referred to baths, might be related to late antique baths than I used to do before. And that was thanks to some precious observation that I could know in advance, thanks to Sadi PhD thesis. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you for explaining the basic structure of the work. And of course, I will myself explain most of the results of the book in the last lecture of today. It is now my great pleasure to announce the next speaker, which is Dr. Nathalie de Haan. Nathalie de Haan served a bit as my bathing mentor, if I may say so. She has been with me from the start, and she has been of a tremendous help in explaining the situation of bathing habits, structuring the book, and structuring the PhD as well. So Nathalie de Haan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all hear me well and see the screen? Because
see the
I got
screen
some
now.
messages telling me that Zoom was doing something I didn't expect, but at least if you can hear me.
We don't see your presentation.
The presentation yet, Nathalie.
Okay. So I'll start sharing again. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It works.
You can still see it?
Yeah,
yes.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. Cari colleghi, it is a pleasure and honor to contribute to this roundtable with a short paper on the central baths in Pompeii. Today we celebrate the publication of Sadi Maréchal's marvelous book. Congratulations to Sadi, and warm thanks to him and to the Academia Belgica for hosting this roundtable and for the invitation to participate. My talk today is the result of work in progress in a double sense. A monograph focusing on the central baths in Pompeii is forthcoming. Moreover, the central baths, the Terme Centrali, were still under construction, so work in progress, when Mount Vesuvius erupted in AD 79. The results presented here are the fruit of collaboration. First of all, with my German colleague and dear friend Kurt Wallat, who is also the co-author of our forthcoming book. The project took place under the aegis of the Royal Netherlands Institute at Rome, with permission and full support of successive soprintendenti and the staff of the Soprintendenza in Pompeii, for which we are most grateful. Meanwhile, the graphic and 3D documentation was realized together with colleagues from the Technical University of Karlsruhe. Our publication will be the first monograph on this bathing complex, apart from a number of brief descriptions in guides and handbooks on Pompeii, Roman architecture, or ancient baths and bathing habits in general, the building is up until now essentially unpublished. And hopefully our publication will fill in this gap, providing full documentation of the standing walls, of the architectural, technical, and decorative features. Finally, an analysis of the design and ideas about the planned use of the baths will be offered. Even more important is the fact that the central baths were designed and built in a pivotal period for the development of Roman baths and bathing culture, that is, the second half of the 1st century AD. A number of technical innovations changed the experience of going to the baths dramatically. In the central baths, we observed the very first implementations of such technical novelties as part of the bath's design. Contrary to other contemporary public baths from the 1st century AD, we have the building's first layout. Indeed, the baths were never used and consequently never renovated or even rebuilt, as was the case with so many other public baths from the 1st century. What is more, the baths are unique for the fact that in 79 AD, they were still under construction. There are only few other ancient buildings that were never completed and survived in their unfinished state. This fact provides us with the opportunity to learn more about building processes and the sequence of the work. The name of the building is modern, of course, derived from its central position in the cityscape of Pompeii, at the crossroads of two heavily trafficked main streets, the Via Stabiana and the Via di Nola. The main objectives of the project and its forthcoming publication are listed on the slides. We hope to offer a better understanding of the design, building history, and planned use of the central baths. Also, to increase our knowledge about the methods of construction of baths in the second half of the 1st century AD. And finally, we excavated on selected spots and gathered information about the insula before the bath building was built. Since the insula is situated at the intersection of two major roads of Pompeii, we expected to find evidence for earlier occupation here. In fact, we found traces of an atrium house dating back to at least the 2nd century BC in the southwest corner of the Palaestra. But the focus of this contribution will be on the fact that the baths were still under construction. So I will share some of our thoughts on the building process. The graphic documentation and 3D models were made by a team from Karlsruhe, based on measurements and data collected in 2 campaigns, using photogrammetry with a stereo camera and a total station. Stereometric models from the main bathing rooms and a sample of other rooms, all indicated in red on the plan, were created. Let us focus now on the fact that the baths were still under construction. Evidence for this is abundant. For example, a porticus was planned to the north, west, and south sides of the Palaestra. And please note the building material, the blocks of travertine as well. However, only part of the stylobate, the plinth for the columns, and the gutter were put in place just before the eruption. The bosses necessary for lifting the blocks had not been removed, and the blocks had not received their finishing polish yet. Obviously, this finishing touch was scheduled for a later moment, when there was no danger anymore to be expected from building activities scratching polished surfaces. Such details tell us a lot about the working order and about the various groups of workmen working at the same time on different spots at the building site. 2 columns were found in situ in the middle of the Palaestra during the excavations of the late 19th century. These columns deserve some more attention. They were not polished yet, except for the upper and lower part. Here is a detail. Moreover, incisions are visible, incisions that were made by the stonemason in order to help him cutting the flutes, that is, on both the upper and lower end of the shafts. With a compass, the stonemason had measured the width of the fluting from a model piece, a Musterstuk, right between the two columns, and incised these measurements with the help of a compass, circles and lines on the columns, indicating the inner width of the flutes and the regular distances between the flutes. Work for the natatio was well underway. The cavity for the pool was dug. While visiting the excavation sites, the German scholar and prominent Pompeianista August Mau noticed the cavity and a huge pile of sand. He mentions this in his 1877 note on the excavations of Pompeii. The pile of sand has now disappeared, filling the ancient cavity again, probably during restoration work right after the Second World War. But older photographs still show the cavity. Nowadays, the cavity for the natatio is not very clearly visible anymore, but from above, one can still see its contours because the soil has settled. A channel for the discharge of water was dug in antiquity as well and would have directed water from the natatio to the latrine. In fact, we found some evidence for the planned route of this channel while excavating in the southwest corner of the palestra. The bottom of the natatio was paved but had not received its waterproof coating of opus igninum yet. Since the plans from the 19th century show different dimensions of the natatio, we retraced with some trenches the original size. We were able to locate the exact southwest corner of the natatio, that is the corner of the foundation and pavement in lava blocks, shown here at the slide. The block of bathing rooms was probably built by a specialist team of bath builders. The rooms they built are those constructed with opus caementicium walls faced with the reddish bricks dating to the last period, the Flavian period of Pompeii. The outer walls and the shops were presumably constructed by another team, perhaps a local building firm. Building material from previous buildings, sometimes even complete walls, were incorporated in the outer walls and tabernae. The sudatorium and caldarium were nearly finished. And this is only logic, because workmen would always start in the far end of the bathing rooms and then work from the back part of the building to the front, so in the reverse walking order. Otherwise, the risk of inflicting damage to already finished walls and floors by co-workers walking around with wheelbarrows and heavy building materials would be far too high. The hypocasts of the caldarium, sudatorium, and tepidarium were finished, just as the wall heating system, constructed with tubuli. Moreover, we found fragments of tegulae mammatoi in 2 testing trenches in the tepidarium, indicating that the barrel vaults of the caldarium and tepidarium would have served the heating of the rooms as well. We can be sure, moreover, that the testudines, the bronze devices that would keep the water in the bathtubs as warm as possible, had already been put in place. The proof for that is the fact that the floors of both basins in the caldarium were in part demolished after 79 by people who successfully removed the lead sheet soldered to the testudo. This phenomenon, Beckenausbruch, can be observed in many Roman baths. The term Beckenausbruch was coined by Hubertus Manderscheid and Günter Gabrecht. And it indicates that both the lead sheet underneath the masonry floor in a bathtub and the testudo were taken away. in this case at some point in time after 79 AD. So the lead sheet was removed in small pieces after the stones and opus igninum on top of the lead sheet were demolished and removed. And the same goes for the bronze half cylindrical testudo that was also taken away after the eruption. The testudo opening, moreover, makes clear that this testudo was of huge dimensions. The estimated capacity, some 1,150 liters, exceeds the capacity of other testudines known from this period. This slide shows you the much smaller testudo, the same period, from the women's section of the Stabian baths in Pompeii. Now, no remains of the boiler installation at the backside could be retraced. Possibly, this oversized testudo represents an experimental phase in which a boiler for the heating of water was replaced by such a huge testudo that served to heat the water and keep it as warm as possible, as long as possible. But that's only an hypothesis. Since we found no traces, we would have expected to see masonry for the boiler installation connected to the back wall of the caldarium. There's no trace of that, and it seems strange to later add such a construction for a heavy boiler. So this is perhaps a wild, but we hope at least an educated guess. Back to the work finished, the walls were covered with a prime coat, just as the tubuli visible on the slides. So the bathing room still lacked its decoration of walls and floors. And this brings us to the last topic of my talk today, the work that was never finished. The shops were excavated slightly earlier, basically in the 1860s, and the excavation reports mention some finds that allow for the assumption that some of these shops were already in use, or at least supposed to open soon. But the baths were still far from finished. Apart from the unfinished natatio and the porticos, much of the planned work was not yet carried out, but a start had been made, as the columns shown to you before and these marble slabs show. These large slabs of marble indicate that the planned decoration of parts of the building would have been lavish, had the building been finished. Slabs of Pavonazzetto and Cipollino marble were waiting for their final destination. For all these building activities, water was indispensable. Now we know that Pompeii's urban water system was only partially functioning in 79. The baths were not connected yet to the eventually completely renovated urban water system. But building requires large and steady amounts of water. So a provisional system was used. Water was needed for a wide range of building activities, such as making mortar, opus caementicium, opus igninum, polishing of stone, and cooling saw blades, to mention just a few. Cleaning activities followed by an excavation proved the existence of this provisional water system, supplying the water for the building activities that were in full swing. A lead pipe for running water was retraced next to a basin at a lower level. The basin turned out to be the reused impluvium of a previous atrium house. And this explains both its lower level and the fact that the basin was situated on a spot eventually intersected by the planned portico. I hope it's clear on the... So here's this reused impluvium, and this was the root of the planned portico. Again, August Mau's reports of 1877 and 1878 are of particular interest, since some features described by Mau can no longer be observed. According to August Mau, the lead pipe came in from the west underneath the wall of one of the shops facing the Via Stabiana. It was provided with a bronze tap, which is no longer in situ. After cleaning the basin, we started excavating near the southeast corner, so here in this area, and very soon retraced the original atrium floor. Moreover, we found a high number of sherds of amphorae and courseware. We also found a thick layer of lime, indicating that this was a spot where the mixing of water from the reused impluvium, lime and sand to mortar had taken place. In conclusion, a very short assessment of the central baths. The first look at the plans of the Stabian and the central baths seem to hint at many similarities. Palestra with a row of bathing rooms facing southwest. This is the Stabian baths, the central baths, and shops lining the streets. In fact, this has led most scholars until now to wrong conclusions about the central baths. That the baths were characterized as old-fashioned and what one could expect in a provincial town like Pompeii, literally shaken by a heavy earthquake a decade before. A closer look, however, reveals many differences between the Stabian and central baths, strongly suggesting that the central baths were a very modern, state-of-the-art bathing complex, quite different from Pompeii's older establishments. First of all, the huge window openings of the heated rooms made bathing in the central baths a completely different experience compared to bathing in the earlier public baths. Instead of dark, cramped rooms, the heated rooms of the central baths were well lit and spacious. People bathing here would have enjoyed the abundant light on sunny days, thanks to the large windows made possible by the recent invention of window glass shortly before. The abundance of water, the rich decor with colored marbles, the high temperatures that would have been reached in the bathing rooms with also heated vaults, as the result of technical innovations, had the central baths been finished. Then the bathing experience would have been totally different from taking a bath in Pompeii's older public bathing establishments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathalie, for this stimulating and very interesting talk about really a bathhouse that's on the turning point and really on a very special moment in history where we also have the introduction of, as you said, large windows and also with wall heating, the disappearance of the labrum, etc. So in my opinion, also a very, very important bath building. I will now give the floor to Professor Francesca Romana Stassola of the Sapienza University in Rome. She has published also on late antique baths and bathing habits, especially her book from 2002, Paula Van Discouris, has also been a tremendous help for me and for other scholars alike working on late antique baths. So Professoressa, the floor is yours.
Grazie molte di questo invito e grazie anche di aver mantenuto questa iniziativa malgrado le difficoltà, no? È stata una cosa molto importante. Io provo a condividere il mio schermo. Scusate. Perfetto. È a posto, vero?
Perfetto, sì.
Sì. E dunque la continuità d'uso della pratica balneare, ben oltre la stagione delle grandi terme romane, è ormai un dato concordemente assodato e ben dimostrato anche dalle emergenze archeologiche che sempre più numerose ci mostrano la varietà degli impianti balneari tardoantichi, connessi con le realtà più diverse, sia pubbliche che private, sia di nuove costruzioni, sia della modificazione e spesso nella riduzione degli spazi di strutture più ampie. Proprio i dati materiali attestano di questa continuità in modo sempre più consistente e più articolato, mostrando come l'uomo tardoantico abbia con la pratica balneare un rapporto sempre più funzionale e strumentale piuttosto che di rapporto sociale. Alcuni assunti negli ultimi anni sono stati ormai ben chiariti da svariati studi sulla termalità tardoantica, e uno è stato presentato questo pomeriggio, e possono essere riassunti in alcuni punti cardine. Innanzitutto va operato un distinguo tra i grandi impianti termali e i più comuni e diffusi impianti balneari. Le grandi terme pubbliche avevano necessità per il loro funzionamento di una serie di infrastrutture collegate ad opere pubbliche, a forme di organizzazione ad impatto necessariamente pubblico, dall'approvvigionamento allo smaltimento delle acque, dalla viabilità urbana alla manutenzione. In assenza di un potere centrale forte e ben strutturato, in assenza di un'amministrazione urbana di buona tenuta, le grandi strutture termali non hanno alcuna possibilità di continuare a vivere. A questo vanno aggiunti altri fattori, in primo luogo la mancanza dell'evergetismo, fondamentali per questi grandi impianti, che in età tardoantica appare dirottato verso edifici di culto. È quindi ben comprensibile che la stagione delle grandi terme abbia fine in Occidente attorno al IV secolo, quando vengono a mancare in primo luogo le condizioni per la loro sostenibilità. Ben diversa è la condizione degli impianti di minori dimensioni a conduzione pubblica o privata, o ancora di quelli annessi all'abitazione e quindi non aperti al pubblico. Questi continuano la loro vita perché non risentono della crisi che investe le terme e anzi vanno a sopperire anche alla loro funzione. È però proprio in queste strutture che ci si rende conto che qualcosa è cambiato nella pratica della tradizione balneare, nella pratica balneare della tradizione romana. In maniera più o meno evidente, in maniera più o meno decisa e in maniera più o meno progressiva, alcuni mutamenti si presentano infatti come irreversibili. Dovendo mettere in evidenza i più macroscopici, potremo individuarli in alcuni aspetti che hanno un certo impatto, innanzitutto a livello architettonico. Ad esempio nella scomparsa degli ambienti di intrattenimento nei quali si svolgeva la vita sociale, come gli spogliatoi, o nei servizi accessori come le stanze destinate ai massaggi, alla depilazione e a tutta quella serie di attività connessi con la pratica balneare. Tutto questo comporta quindi che il tempo di permanenza negli impianti termali tende a ridursi e il numero di attività a contrarsi. Ci si reca ai balnea solo per lavarsi, quindi, ma questo bagno sembra perdere la triplice scansione, con il passaggio ad ambienti e nelle vasche di diversa temperatura per concentrarsi in una sola vasca di acqua calda. Le stesse vasche, inoltre, perdono la funzione comune per ridursi ad ospitare una sola persona o al massimo un paio. I vecchi impianti vengono trasformati mediante l'abbandono e la rimodulazione degli ambienti non più necessari come gli ampi apoditeria o i tepi d'aria. I nuovi impianti sono spesso di piccole dimensioni con vasche monoposto e questo è molto evidente in molte strutture, sia in Oriente con impianti molto di piccole dimensioni, sia anche in Occidente, anche qui vicino, qui siamo nelle terme dello scheletro a Ostia di scavo recente con queste piccole vasche monoposto o biposto. È evidente che la caratteristica che più viene a mancare nei balnei tardoantichi è proprio l'aspetto sociale che rappresentava il tratto delle grandi terme romane. Le ragioni di queste modifiche vanno ricondotte a molti aspetti, rispetto ai quali non sono certamente secondari quelli economici, ma certamente il cambio di approccio culturale nei confronti della pratica balneare costituisce il tratto significativo da leggere in concomitanza con la diffusione della religione cristiana. Sono molti i passi degli autori cristiani che specificano la differenza sostanziale tra lavarsi per dovere e lavarsi per piacere. A cominciare da Gregorio Magno, che già nei primissimi del VII secolo si preoccupa di specificare che il bagno andava preso esclusivamente pro necessitatis corporis e non certo pro luxu animi et voluptate. Il confine tra questi due modi di sentire non doveva certo essere semplice, così nel dubbio era meglio astenersi dal bagno la domenica per non contaminare con la ricerca della voluttà il giorno da dedicare al Signore. Non mi soffermo qui sulle numerose fonti cristiane anche delle origini, a partire proprio da Gerolamo fino alle regole monastiche, che si preoccupano di contenere la pratica balneare agli aspetti strettamente funzionali, proprio perché il piacere non sovrabbondasse la stretta necessità. Pratiche come l'astensione dal bagno come penitenza finirono con limitare il numero dei bagni ad alcune categorie, come per esempio di monaci, che tendono quindi a prenderlo sempre meno. La predilezione per forme di lavaggio parziali, come per esempio quella limitata alle mani o al volto, comportò la diffusione di catini, di tinozze, di recipienti alternativi alle vasche da bagno. Colpisce molto questo timore della voluttà dell'acqua da parte di una religione che nell'acqua e con l'acqua ha segnato i momenti forse più significativi della sua storia sacra. Dalla prima divisione del mondo nella Genesi, al diluvio e alla successiva riconciliazione fra Dio e il suo popolo, dalla potenza dell'apertura del Mar Rosso, che ha poi travolto con forza il faraone e il suo esercito, alla reiterazione nella salmistica, nel ricordo delle fonti dell'acqua viva, fino forse al momento più... Non va avanti il PowerPoint, ecco, dicevo fino al momento più significativo e riassuntivo della storia sacra legata all'acqua, che è il battesimo di Cristo del Giordano e che corrisponde appunto al disvelamento di Cristo come figlio di Dio. L'acqua quindi è fondamentale nel cristianesimo e l'acqua è fondamentale nella vita del cristiano, che attraverso l'acqua muore come semplice uomo e nasce alla vera vita come figlio di Dio. Il rito del battesimo si configura sì nella Chiesa delle origini come un momento liturgicamente fondante, da effettuare per quanto possibile ad imitazione del gesto di Giovanni Battista nel momento in cui battezza Gesù Cristo. Non a caso la Didache, la più antica normativa cristiana che c'è rimasta e che si data da fine I e II secolo, prescrive, e qui la cito in italiano, riguardo al battesimo così battezzate nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo in acqua viva. Se però non hai acqua viva, battezza in altra acqua, e se non puoi in quella fredda, in quella calda. E se infine non hai nessuna delle due, versa sulla testa 3 volte acqua in nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Il battesimo va quindi preferibilmente effettuato a imitazione di quello di Cristo in acqua viva e quindi in un corso d'acqua. Una condizione non semplice, soprattutto in una chiesa sempre più strutturata, con una liturgia sempre più organizzata, che prevedeva il battesimo la notte di Pasqua, seguito dalla liturgia pasquale nella chiesa che doveva essere quindi non lontana. In alternativa quindi si battezza in acqua fredda o calda, ma chiaramente per immersione, visto che il battesimo per triplice aspersione rappresenta solo la terza ipotesi. Nella scelta del modello architettonico da utilizzare, e qui riusciamo a vederli se riesco ad andare avanti, ecco, dicevo che nella scelta appunto dei modelli architettonici che si decide di utilizzare, e nel momento proprio della svolta costantiniana, si va quindi verso ciò che è più noto e più funzionale. E il modello che si sceglie è appunto quello della vasca termale. Una vasca che si tenta di adeguare alla bisogna, creandovi acqua viva, con canalizzazioni per l'adduzione e con forme di deflusso delle acque, con scale per consentire ai catecumeni di scendervi e di effettuare la triplice immersione, guidati appunto dal vescovo. Queste sono tra le vasche battesimali più famose appunto in Tunisia, ma le abbiamo anche qui in Occidente. Questi sono esempi di Selinunte oppure il celebre battistero di Aquileia. E andando appunto ad osservare questi come altri tipi architettonici, colpisce molto la somiglianza tra le vasche termali e le vasche battesimali, una somiglianza che non poteva non passare inosservata e la cui ambivalenza certamente andava a innestarsi su una dimensione culturale che già tendeva a vedere nella pratica balneare una possibile occasione di peccaminosa voluttà. La Chiesa delle origini si dibatte tra fenomeni di reinterpretatio, funzionali anche alla comprensione e alla diffusione del messaggio cristiano, come è ben chiaro ad esempio nelle scelte iconografiche, e la preoccupazione che una serie di pratiche mutuate dal mondo precristiano vengano assorbite nel nuovo credo e creino confusione nei nuovi adepti, in una mescolanza di credenze e di prassi ibride. Questo accade ad esempio nella pratica funeraria del pasto funebre, che nelle aree di più fresca cristianizzazione, come la Milano di Ambrogio, viene vietato per timore che l'associazione del rito cristiano del refrigerio con quello pagano dell'offerta alimentare al defunto vengano confuse nella mente dei nuovi adepti. Così che, ci racconta Agostino, sua madre Monica, che si era recata nelle necropoli milanesi per onorare le tombe venerate in ossequio al procetto del vescovo, si limita ad un rito simbolico con l'offerta del solo vino in un piccolo calice. Se quindi la reinterpretatio, così diffusa nell'iconografia paleocristiana, sembra avere successo e sdogana alcune fra i temi più iconici dell'arte cristiana, pensiamo ad esempio al Buon Pastore, permane invece il timore della contaminatio, che rischia appunto di confondere gli animi e le coscienze. E questo credo possa essere il rischio che corre l'acqua. L'acqua è il tramite della salvezza e pertanto non può essere soggetta al rischio di contaminazioni. L'acqua, d'altro canto, è necessaria ad una serie di funzioni umane, alcune delle quali estremamente poco nobili. In quanto veicolo di salvezza, l'acqua scaccia ciò che è sporco, l'acqua purifica e pertanto non può indurre alcun peccato. Quindi lavarsi per pezzi è strettamente funzionale e questo risulta chiaro. Fare il bagno nei fiumi freddi con i propri vestiti era considerato una pratica ascetica, secondo le parole di Beda il Venerabile. Il problema vero era lavarsi nelle vasche termali, perché era lì che il piacere di immergersi nelle acque rischiava di superare il dovere dell'igiene. Contemporaneamente, il ricorso della materialità del rito battesimale alle architetture termali, quando non addirittura a strutture termali riutilizzate, come non infrequentemente la ricerca archeologica ci dimostra, rischia di associare in modo del tutto inopportuno la sacralità del sacramento battesimale con la mera pratica termale. Non poteva assolutamente andare ed è in questo senso che l'acqua battesimale si contrappone all'acqua termale. La tenuta del simbolo del sacramento di iniziazione cristiana prevale e fa propria la forma architettonica delle vasche e degli ambienti termali, decretandone inevitabilmente la fine. I bagni quindi non possono che ridursi nell'ottica cristiana che ad impianti nei quali espletare funzioni meramente e sbrigativamente igieniche, con piccole vasche adibite a questo scopo in ambienti spesso modesti e privi di lusso. La sontuosità degli apparati decorativi che apparteneva per tradizione alle strutture termali trasmigra negli edifici battesimali, dove più a lungo permangono le vasche di tradizione classica, le decorazioni musive nelle quali ai motivi tipicamente cristiani si sommano quelli derivati dall'orizzonte iconografico tardo-antico, le volumetrie circolari e gli ampi ambienti voltati. Sarà l'Islam, scevro di ogni condizionamento, a riportare in Occidente il piacere del bagno, e questo radicherà ancor di più, per contrapposizione religiosa, l'essenzialità dei lavaggi cristiani, con la prevalenza delle saune e degli impianti nei quali viene addirittura esclusa l'immersione nelle acque, a cui tanto veniva attribuito in termini di piacere e voluttà. Piacere e voluttà che diventano marginali alla società rigidamente canonizzata, riservata ad ambiente libertini o ad amori illeciti o a contesti estremamente specifici come quelli di rappresentanza o a bagni medicamentosi o rituali. E sarà solo il tardo Medioevo, con una nuova percezione del corpo e la completa metabolizzazione della cristianizzazione sociale, a poter accettare di nuovo il piacere della termalità. Vi ringrazio.
Sì, grazie. Thank you, Professor Stassola, for yet another very interesting talk on a topic that's also very close to mine, and that's also really pointed to the specific difference between Christianizing bathing habits and Christian baptism, of course. It is now my pleasure to give the word to Professor Pensabeni. He needs no further introduction, of course, and we're glad to have him here to talk, to give his lecture about the fascinating complex of Piazza Armerina. Professor, please.
Allora, saltiamo i preliminari. Vi dicevo che gli edifici termali che con Paolo Barresi abbiamo studiato e stiamo studiando, mi sentite? Sì?
Sì, sì.
Hanno in comune il fatto di avere, entrambi sono residenze private che hanno 2 bagni, diciamo, lungo il perimetro esterno, al confine con il perimetro esterno delle residenze. Ora vediamo se riesco ad andare avanti, scusate. Adesso ovviamente non va avanti. Scusate. Ecco. Allora, il primo edificio di cui parliamo, che abbiamo già pubblicato, è appunto le terme nuove che abbiamo scavato a sud della villa di Piazza Armerina. La zona che vedete qua. Ecco, qui vedete tutto l'edificio termale scavato. Ora diciamo adesso, per capire la posizione di questo edificio termale all'interno della villa, ecco, è questa posizione praticamente. Questa è una ricostruzione astrometrica della villa con gli edifici basilicali per la conservazione delle derrate alimentari, e in corrispondenza con il lato sud di questa basilica per la conservazione delle derrate alimentari abbiamo rinvenuto questo edificio termale. Qui praticamente l'edificio termale si trova agli inizi, non so se adesso la freccia non riesco a vedere, si trova praticamente agli inizi all'entrata, diciamo, del complesso. Oh, scusate che la freccia non si vede, ecco qua. Quindi praticamente questa è l'entrata trionfale a forma di arco trionfale nella villa. Qui vi è una grande cortile con 2 edifici per la conservazione delle derrate alimentari prodotte nel latifondo, e contiguo a questi 2 edifici vi è questo edificio termale che vedete qua, che avete visto prima. Ora, questo edificio termale, diciamo, adesso non entro nei fasi. Una prima fase contemporanea alla costruzione della villa in età tardo-costantiniana, una seconda fase successiva al terremoto del 160-61, e poi abbiamo una terza fase che è questa che vedete qui, e abbiamo delle fasi successive, questa è l'ultima, in cui vi sono state delle alluvioni che hanno modificato completamente l'uso di questo edificio termale, che è trasformato. Quindi ora sono un po' agitato, forse troppo svelto, è essenziale questo scavo, cioè consente della villa durante il IV, V e VI secolo, informazioni che erano state, diciamo, ridotte al minimo dagli scavi invece della villa negli anni 50, in quanto ora si privilegiava la scoperta dei mosaici. Per cui, studiando questo edificio termale con i vari riempimenti alluvionali, distruzione eccetera, abbiamo potuto ricostruire quello che è successo, diciamo, nell'epoca di vita della villa e del suo abbandono. Ora, nella fase, diciamo, come vedete anche in questo edificio termale vi sono diciamo una piccola vasca in questa, comunque adesso non entro, forse troppo in particolare, diciamo, ormai il tempo credo che starà per vedere rapidamente. Questo è la zona del frigidario, cioè del frigidario al momento, diciamo, quando è stato trasformato in edificio a scopi artigianali, di produzione artigianale. Quindi questa era diciamo, la vasca, una sorta di natasio frigidario che si apriva su questo lato principale del frigidario. Poi la sala è stata ridivisa in due e con dei muri di sostegno che sono stati appoggiati, vedremo ai muri delle terme, hanno costruito dei muri, diciamo, di rinforzo in questa fase. Ecco, questa è una piccola vasca che forse potrebbe corrispondere a quelle di cui parlava Francesca prima, di vasche per bagni soltanto per 1 o 2 persone. E in questa parte del frigidario abbiamo trovato un mosaico in cui vi è un'iscrizione probabilmente di una ballerina, in quanto dice Treptona viva, bevi, viva per Treptona, ma nello stesso tempo è invito a bere. Ecco, qui vedete la villa e gli edifici commerciali e la posizione delle terme. Questi sono alcuni, diciamo, resti di mosaici, che però adesso non ho il tempo per parlarne, ce n'è poco, per cui vi faccio le classiche presenze dei sandali all'entrata della zona calda, che si trova spesso appunto negli edifici termali. Questo praticamente questo mosaico proprio in questa zona qua. L'entrata a una sala dove vi era una grande vasca per l'acqua calda. Ecco, questi sono sempre i particolari. Ora, le terme poi hanno avuto una successiva trasformazione di uso in età islamica, quando si è inserita una grande cisterna in una delle sale calde, questa. Qui vedete, questa è in queste stanze riscaldate, vedete che vi sono ancora i tubi per riscaldamento delle pareti, è stata inserita questa fornace che era in uso sicuramente nel X-XI secolo. Quindi praticamente le terme sono sapute rispetto ad altri edifici in questa zona della villa, appunto perché sono state utilizzate in età medievale. Ecco qui Ora, questo è stato di nuovo diciamo, l'elemento su cui adesso vorrei parlarvi, che sempre si ricollega ai lavori di Sadi Marescial, è il fatto che le terme presentavano, diciamo, nella parte est una corte quadrangolare, che vedete qua, in quale durante lo scavo abbiamo trovato le colonne, che ora vi farò vedere, in posizione di crono, e questa corte serviva da palestra ma anche da entrata. Però l'entrata, già sottolineava nel suo lavoro Sadi Marescial, non è in asse con l'entrata del frigidario, anche qua è un'entrata segnata da colonne, ma si trova in un lato ed è costituita una piccola porta. Siamo in un periodo di invasioni, vandali, eccetera, e per cui si era costruita questa palestra, ma in modo da renderla chiusa verso l'esterno, e accessibile soltanto attraverso questa piccola porta che vedete qui. Se riesco, vabbè, ecco qua sempre appunto l'edificio termale, vedete le colonne che abbiamo trovato in stato duro vicino alle basi. Qui vi è questa entrata di cui vi ho parlato prima. Ecco, qui è sottolineata la zona della palestra entrata, diciamo. E ora, se vedete anche qua nel cerchio, è sottolineata questa parte, perché qui vi era un muro costituito, era di rinforzo da una parte della muratura dell'edificio termale quando non funzionava più come terme, ma che poi viene a costituire come una sorta di rinforzo, difesa di tutta questa zona, proseguiva in questa zona, ed era costituito da colonne. Ora io scusate, sono forse in ritardo, cercherò di... Ecco, vedete a destra colonne appunto nella situazione di crollo. Adesso vi farò vedere questo muro. Ecco, vedete questo muro di rinforzo che è stato ritrovato, questo muro di rinforzo è costituito da frammenti architettonici prelevati appunto da questa palestra entrata, che abbiamo trovato almeno 7-8 capitelli tra corinzi, ionici e compositi che costituivano questo muro e sul quale appunto, in base al quale appunto abbiamo potuto ricostruire le terme. Questa palestra di cui vi sto parlando. Ecco, questo è un po' il capitello composto. Non entro troppo nei particolari. Questo, come vedete, è un confronto. Questo è l'edificio termale di Piazza Armerina con questa corte di cui vi ho parlato, e questo è un confronto appunto a Brad in Siria, dove appunto abbiamo ugualmente una specie di corte porticata che consentiva l'accesso all'edificio termale. E qui diciamo questo edificio termale rientra in questa tipologia. Ora però io non vi ho detto che l'edificio termale più noto delle terme si trovava invece a ovest, è questo. Quindi noi abbiamo praticamente nella zona diciamo ovest delle terme, queste terme che sono quelle più grandi, padronali diciamo, e queste di cui vi sto parlando adesso. A queste terme si accedeva sicuramente dal cortile d'ingresso, da questa zona, e si poteva accedere anche dalla corte porticata. Comunque sono entrambi terme che diciamo, si sviluppano all'esterno della villa e che appunto potrebbero collocarsi sempre, anche questo edificio termale più grande potrebbe collocarsi nell'ambito delle terme semipubbliche di cui parlava appunto Stato Maresciallo. Ora molto rapidamente cerco veramente di fare il più presto possibile. Le terme di Capoboeo sono dunque un edificio termale scavato negli anni 39-40, poi negli anni 50, 60, eccetera, che in questa occasione hanno, diciamo, portato alla luce un'insula che era costituita almeno da 2 case che sono state poi unificate tra il secondo e il terzo secolo d.C. La caratteristica di questo grande complesso che così si è formato, che presentava, adesso qui si vede male, un grande cortile, ma un grande cortile che è al centro, era appunto di avere 2 edifici termali, uno più antico che è questo e uno più recente costituito da questo. Può essere anche che siano 2 bagni che erano connessi alle 2 case prima dell'unione in un'unica grande casa, ma che sono state conservate apparentemente. Guarda, questo è un lavoro diciamo che abbiamo iniziato da 2 anni, per cui siamo ancora agli inizi un pochino del lavoro, e per cui vi faccio soltanto vedere appunto delle fotografie che fanno vedere la parte termale a sinistra del lato nord, ma nord-est a sinistra. Questa è una foto fatta recentemente. E dunque questa parte nord-est è restituito a diversi mosaici, appunto collocabili probabilmente in epoca del terzo secolo, con scene di caccia, con scene di animali appunto che cacciano altri animali. E ora vi faccio vedere alcuni di questi particolari, ma non entro nella disamina. Ecco, questo invece è l'altro bagno termale a destra, diciamo nel lato nord-ovest, nel lato nord-est, che invece presenta un altro tipo di mosaici, per cui la rappresentazione della trinacria. Ma diciamo adesso io non voglio, ormai sono già le 6:10, sono già in 10 minuti di ritardo rispetto alla mia presentazione. Mi dispiace dell'inconveniente che c'è stato agli inizi, ma lo scopo di questa presentazione era quello di mettere a confronto 2 situazioni diverse in residenze private, con di committenza evidentemente diversa, più ricca quella di Piazza Armerina, media quella di Capoboeo all'Ulibeo, in cui in entrambi si verifica la presenza di terme che hanno un'apertura anche verso l'esterno. In quelle di Capo Boeo stiamo procedendo di nuovo a un nuovo rilievo di questa parte termale, quindi spero che in un futuro potremo essere più precisi. Grazie, scusate l'inconveniente ancora. Non so se Paolo ti vuoi aggiungere qualcosa. Perché ti vedo Paolo Barresi dallo schermo. Va bene. Per me va bene così.
Ok.
Sadi Bariscial, mi dispiace della fretta.
No. Sorry, Professor, that technical difficulties has proven again to work against us. Especially, this is the first time that we try this, so it's very unfortunate that sometimes part of your lecture was difficult to follow. But two extremely interesting examples of bathhouses, semi-public bathhouses. In the last presentation will be my own. Let me just remind you that at the end of my presentation, it will be possible to submit questions through the chat function of Zoom. This is a round table, so we'll try and incorporate some of your questions in the discussion. So we're running a bit late, but I'll try to keep my presentation a bit shorter. Okay, so I'll try, I hope it'll work. Is it working?
Yep.
All right. Okay. So first of all, I would still like to thank the Belgian Academy for hosting this. I would also have a brief moment to thank the people working at Brill Publishing for making this book possible and for all their tremendous help. And also thank the series editor, Luc Levin, who is also part of my jury to facilitate the process of publishing. And of course, also all the people working at the Late Antique Archaeology Supplement series who helped me a lot with publishing of this book. So let's start off with just visualizing the research area I've been working on for my PhD, and which is also the center of this book. You can see that it's the Italian peninsula, including Sicily and Sardinia. It's also North Africa, including also Egypt, which is not often the case for scientific research involving Africa. And then there's also the three late antique provinces of Palestina. So the scope of this book was to examine all types of evidence available for the late antique baths and for late antique bathing habits. So not only the archaeological evidence, but also the written evidence. So in this presentation, I will shortly highlight some of the results, which can also be found in the book. We'll start off with written evidence based on the ancient Greek and Latin literature, legal sources, ecumenical councils and synods, but also inscription and papyri. Then moving on to archaeological evidence, so for the main regions under discussion, and then ending with an epilogue about the transition to the early hammams in North Africa and the Middle East. So one of the important conclusions found in the written evidence and in the literature concerning bath-related passages is that we still find it that baths are a key location within towns, and they give names to entire neighborhoods, but they also act as rendezvous points for both official and trivial occasions. Just give you some examples. Ausonius writing about Mediolanum, so modern Milan, that there was a quarter renowned under the title of the Herculean Baths. So and it was an imperial bathhouse, giving its name to an entire neighborhood. Whether this was the official name or it just was something in a colloquial language, that's perhaps irrelevant, but it's important that a certain quarter of the city was still known from the baths. Socrates Scholasticus, writing that a Praetorian prefect who went to the public baths called Zeuxippus, so here we are in Constantinople, asked to send Paul, who was a bishop, requesting his attendance there for some public affairs. So you can see that it also acted as a rendezvous point for some official businesses. We have continued imperial patronage even under Christian emperors. We have several mentions of emperors still contributing to the embellishment, to the restoration of bathhouses. We have Ammianus Marcellinus, who writes that at Antioch there were some riots and that the people shouted out, "Let Valens be burned alive," and the words of the public criers were continually heard. And they were directing the people to go gather firewood to fire the baths of Valens in the building in which the emperor himself had taken such an interest. So here we have a Christian emperor at Antioch who apparently still paid for some aspects of the bathing. It was still considered, of course, good for health. We find that in medical authors like Theodorus Priscianus all the way down to Alexander of Tralles. But we also find this in Christian and non-Christian writers alike, so in the non-medical literature. If we take this letter by Jerome about a Christian virgin, he says, until they devout themselves to God, if need must, let her visit the baths, take a little wine for the stomach's sake, have a support of a meat diet, lest her feet fail her before the race begins. So until she devotes herself to God, it is still possible for her to go to the bathhouse, to drink some wine, to have a diet, a special diet, also including meat. So all the things that she will not be able to do once she committed herself to God, she can do it before her. So this shows that bathing was allowed also for Christian women, and that only when it concerns special categories such as virgins, but also later for ascetics, for monks, etc., that they should refrain from baths only in the extremely necessary cases such as illness, etc. We have also a fragment by Johannes Chrysostomos, who actually writes, "Enjoy your baths, take care of your body." So it was really connected to this health aspect, that bathing was actually good for health. So here the importance of a heated section also, and the cold bath. The cold bath was important to strengthen the body after the weakening effect of the hot rooms. And so we have in the Scriptoris Historia Augusta that Emperor Carinus had plunge baths that were always cooled down by means of snow, and that once that his bath was too tepid, he said that to one of his bath attendants, "This water is for a woman because it's too hot." So here you see that some cold pools and cold baths were actually considered an aspect of virility. Only hardened men, soldiers, young men should have a cold bath to counter the weakening effects of the hot bathing. But also Sidonius Apollinaris in one of his letters describing a bathhouse that he himself allegedly built when two of his hosts had their private baths closed. He set out his servants to make an ad hoc bathhouse with stones, with red hot stones, and in some sort of a cave, a cavity covered with twigs and goatskins. And so he made a makeshift vapor bath for perspiration. And then he says, when we had it perspired enough and the treatment had left us languid, we finished off with a bracing shower from fountain. And so very important, this two aspects of bathing, even if you had to make a bathhouse yourself, is that you had this heated part and then you countered it with the cold part. Of course, there was some critique as well on the decadence of baths, bathing for too long, bathing too hot, which was for women, or bathing too lavishly with all luxury. We have a letter from Libanius, who said that some people of the elite formerly bathed and slept until noon. So it was really bathing the whole day long was considered to be very well, not done. You have also the Scriptura Historia Augusta again that said that Commodus used to bathe 7 or 8 times a day, and he had the nasty habit of eating while he was at the baths. John Chrysostom said, what is more unreasonable than to go to the baths with all your golden jewelry for showing off? So it was Christian authors and pagan authors alike who looked down on this decadence of bathing. And of course, some Christian authors were against mixed bathing, but also some classical authors were, warning that bathing also did not clean away the sins, as Professor Stassola already mentioned. We have Nilus van Kira, who says that those who engaged in mixed bathing, so his flock, as a bishop, he says that they will be expelled from the community. Commodianus says literally water washes away the sins, but not the inner vices of the heart. So it's all bathing in the bathhouse was only a superficial cleaning rather than an actual spiritual cleaning, being baptism. So there are several passages of Christians at the baths, Socrates, Scholasticus again, with a famous quote that a bishop who was asked why that he bathed twice a day, he replied, because it's inconvenient to bathe 3 times. We have Augustine saying that an ecclesiastical congress in Carthage in AD 411 was held in such spacious, bright lit and cold rooms in the baths of Gargilius. So even ecclesiastical congresses could take place in specific parts of the bathhouses. Palladius writing that some bishops wasted money of the poor on hanging corridors, water cisterns, and also disreputable baths hidden from sight for effeminate men. So even bishops offering bathhouses to their community. For the legal sources and synods, I will be very short. So law codes mainly involving baths mainly involve financial aspects, building activities, but also some social aspects, such as houses that were converted into baths or private baths that were opened to the public in the digesta. Some synods, like the Synod of Laodicea, prohibited Christians and Christian men to bathe with women. We also have the Constitutiones Apostolorum reiterating such prohibitions. Then for the inscriptions and the papyri, inscriptions mainly pertain to the 4th century. You can see the graph, one of the graphs featured in the book here, with Italy and Africa here more or less at the same number of 4th century inscriptions, and then all the way diminishing down all the way to the 7th century. We have actually the same benefactors as during the imperial period, but only the emperor. Imperial benefactions are only found in inscriptions in Italy in the sample. New construction activity was also rather exceptional. In Africa, we have a lot of verses evoking the leisure of bathing, also often laid down in mosaics referencing to Baya. There are a few attestations of ecclesiastical benefactions. We have here one from Scythopolis in Palestine, found in the suburban context outside of the Byzantine walls, where we have Theodore the Shepherd, so a bishop that actually renewed the baths of the lepers. But here again, we have an inscription that is not commemorating an act of, how do I say, splendor towards the people, but it's rather for the sick people. So it's quite an act of good faith that he's showing. Inscriptions and papyri in North Africa are mainly found So in what is now Tunisia and Algeria, very few examples from Tripolitania or from present-day Morocco, as well in the 4th as in the 5th and 6th centuries. Papyri are often official texts about expenses, about operating costs of the baths. There are some personal letters explaining monthly expenses on baths, also explaining certain bathing utensils that are to be left to certain hairs, etc. The ostraca that have been found mainly pertain to payments and receipts of the personnel. An interesting example here from the catalog from Oxyrhynchus is a receipt of the monks of St. Andrew's Monastery for the acquisition of a rope for the baths, so probably in connection to the water supply by a well. So here you see again that even the monks of St. Andrew's had a small bathhouse. We don't know how it looked like, but they did have a small bathhouse for which they needed some supplies. Then the archaeological evidence for the Italian peninsula, Sardinia and Sicily pertain mainly, as you can see, to the 4th century. I distinguished between possible baths. So these are often just parts of bathhouses, hypocausts, part of bathtubs for which other evidence is lacking. There are around 51 baths with continued use, so that were built during the High Empire, but then had a late antique, so 4th century phase or later. And new construction, as you can see, is dwindling throughout the centuries. There are also baths that have been excavated a long time ago, often 19th and early 20th century, and which are just simply attributed to late antiquity without further explanation. So these are very questionable and actually are in need of a reconsideration. In North Africa, we see similar results, especially with the newly built baths that are actually almost disappearing already in the 5th century, and then practically none in the 6th century. In Cyrenaica in Egypt, we have a lot of examples of baths of an uncertain date, but just widely attributed to late antiquity. For Cyrenaica, you can see that there are still some examples of baths that were in use during the 7th century, especially, for example, near Tokra, where some inscriptions, Islamic inscriptions have been found, for example, in the late antique baths, which could point to a possible continued phase of use during the Islamic phase. In Egypt, the situation is a bit different. You can see that especially in the 6th and in the 7th century, a lot of baths were still in use. This is also in line with what we have seen for the papyri. And a lot of baths also have been just attributed to a Byzantine phase, and we don't exactly know to which phase, to which century they belonged. In Palestine, again, the same picture as in Egypt, with actually a few baths pertaining to the 5th and 6th century, but continued use of already existing baths in the 7th century. On an archaeological level, we can see that there, as already has been mentioned, several small baths were very popular. Instead of building just one large alveus, we often have several small single-person pools. Round shapes, oval shapes are becoming very popular, especially in Italy, but also in other parts of the empire. You can see here the example of Scythopolis, where we do have actually in the cold section, you can see it here, that there are two quite large piscinae, but then again, two smaller single-person tubs. The same for the Caldarium, where we have two supposedly large alveoli, and then something which appears to be 2 small individual tubs. So you actually had, besides multi-person pools, also had this pools for perhaps a more personal use. What is interesting is that we also find some of these examples in imperial type baths, such as the Comaldika baths in Alexandria, dating from the 4th century. And here the Polish team that excavated it actually did some how should you call it? Chemical analysis of shale deposits found on the bottom of the pools, of which they could decide that some pools were actually used for warm water, others, so here in red, others were used for tepid water, here in orange, and others were used for cold water pools. And so you can see that you have inside the heated section, for example, inside of the caldarium, you could have pools with alveoli of different temperatures. And so there's also a possibility that these small pools actually offered other types of treatments, other types of pools, some with more tepid waters. So we have a diversification of the bathing habit through these small pools. This is something we can see in, for example, also in thermal baths. This is the example in Tunisia of Jebel Oust, where a similar analysis of shale deposits inside the bathtubs has been carried out, and where we can also see that within these small single-person pools, there is a variation with very hot water in the red pools here, and then some more tepid water in the smaller pools and in the large pool here. So again, and perhaps this was one of the how you call it, the influences for this diversification, was that these thermal baths were of course used to treat ailments and to give specific treatments to the individual bather. And this is perhaps some idea that was introduced or more common in late antique baths to give more personal treatments within a bathhouse, also within a public bathhouse. Perhaps this is a tradition that also came from the thermal baths. Then very quickly about some of the baths that had that were actually built inside of private houses, but had public entrances to the street. And I will not go into this in further detail, as Professor Pensabene already has. Just here 2 examples, one from Cuicul, the House of Europe, where we have actually an entrance, 2 entrances to this bathhouse. So here is the house to the left. And the bathhouse was actually accessible from both of these main traffic arteries. Same here in Carthage, where actually in late antiquity, this private bathhouse of an insula was actually opened up to the street when a separate street entrance was created, creating here also building a small wall so that there was no direct insight into the bathhouse. Again, also with different single-person pools. And then the insula itself actually had a small, very small bathhouse for more private use that was probably not publicly accessible. And so here, again, 2 nice examples of this trend of opening up a bathhouse, something we have already seen also in the legal sources. Remember the fragment from the Digesta, so private houses and private baths opening up to the public. Then a trend that is also especially visible in North Africa and Cyrenaica in the East, in Egypt, in the Middle East and Palestine, is the use of these large cold spaces. You can see here an example from Ptolemais, where you have a small central, perhaps a pool, perhaps a fountain, it's possibly a large pool, and then 2 smaller bathhouses, 2 smaller pools, 2 smaller piscinae flanking the entrance to the inner bathhouse and to the warm room. In the warm room, also in the caldarium, in its last phase, 1 small single-person bathtub built in addition to these larger multi-person pools. An example from Egypt, Maria, that's in the Nile Delta, which was an important spot on a pilgrim's routes, and where we also find these different small pools, both in the cold section and in the heated section, and that we also find here these large open spaces that may have acted as gathering rooms for all sorts of events. I remember the letters by Augustine, who said that an ecclesiastical congress was held in one of large well-lit rooms, etc. So actually here in Ptolemais, we have here something that may be interpreted as a speaker's corner, a speaker's bench, a bema, which may have been used to address gatherings. That's at least what the excavators interpreted. Here's some more examples of Egypt, where we find interesting examples of double baths. So double baths were very typical at the start of the bathing habit. If you think of for example, the Forum baths in Pompeii, where you have two different wings. If you think of the Stabian baths, two different wings for men and for women. This is something that is also recurring in late antique Egypt. Here in the 5th century, here in Abu Mena, an important pilgrimage center in Egypt in the 6th century, where we have very elaborate double baths, as we call them, and which have been interpreted as men's sections and women's sections. And then for the Christian use of baths, we have baths attached to, for example, basilicas, such as here in Sbeitla in Tunisia. So the basilica is to the south of the bathhouse here. But the bathhouse itself was accessible from the street. We have baths that were connected to the baptistry, which show all the standard rooms of Roman baths: cold section with cold pool, and heated section with different heated pools. And towards the end also of late antiquity in Egypt, we start to find new technological systems. For example, here in Karanis in Egypt, where a system of introducing steam into the caldarium was discovered. So this is something that will be further elaborated and will be very specific to the Islamic hammams, of course, where steam was actually one of the most important elements, newly introduced elements in the caldarium, in the hot room. And so here, possibly already in Egypt, and then also there are some examples in Cyrenaica where we have this introduction of steam from a boiler directly into the rooms. So perhaps we here have a first phase of what will later be a very important element in Islamic hammams. So that's the cross section here of the caldarium, which you have the boiler installations, which is quite traditional and which supply this heated pool. But now we have also this channel connecting the steam that is generated here in this reservoir that is directly conducted into the caldarium. In the book, I also, as Francesca Carboni already said, elaborate some on the urban contexts. I place the baths in relations to the most important traffic arteries, to the aqueduct systems, to the rise of new social hubs, such as churches, here depicted in yellow, in this case of Sbeitla, where you can see from the 4th to the 5th and 6th century, actually that the baths, the normal high imperial baths, were actually on this axis connecting here this important public space of temples with the theater complex, and that the most important baths were located there. And that during late antiquity, we actually have the baths of Basilica II that are attached to the basilica, but we also have here bathhouses along this important traffic artery that start to appear. And actually in the 6th century, the baths along this traffic artery and where several churches are built are the only baths still in existence. And so you have also a shift from social hubs within the city and social places of social gathering in several cities discussed in the book. So to conclude, I'll have a short roundup of the transition to hammams. Here is a map of some of the most important Umayyad period baths. There also are some examples of Roman baths within Umayyad phase that have been discovered. So mainly in modern day Syria, Jordan, and Israel-Palestine. One of the most important examples, of course, is Qusayr Amra in Jordan, where you can find some typical elements of Roman baths, not in the least, of course, the hypocaust system that is still present, but also these small pools, single-person pools that are still present. And then, as already said, this principle of steam, of inducing steam into the hot room. But we can also see in its decoration that it's still very Roman, or still, there's no ban on the depiction of human or natural beings yet. And so we have this Venus-like figure in the baths depicted inside this cold section of a very early Islamic bathhouse. So here, just to visualize this bathhouse in Al-Bara in Syria, which is very interesting, which had a Roman phase actually, which was transformed into a hammam actually in the 8th century, in the late 8th century. And so the most important difference was that the pools were destroyed. This one here was turned into a fountain and were actually replaced by small basins, what in Roman world we call labra, and which were used for simple ablutions. So just pouring the hot water or the cold water over the bathers. And then you have here the principle of this steam that was introduced in the hot room. So here you have a cross section. So you're actually looking at where the arrow would be. So here you have this hole here. And you can see that the water for the shallow basins, for these labra, actually were, the water was heated here in a device acting almost like a boiler, but then there was here also an opening from which the hot steam could pass right here into the hot room. And so here you have this completion of the transition to an Islamic hammam, which can also be found, for example, in some of the latest baths that have been excavated in North Africa, for example, here in Tokra, the Byzantine fortress baths dated to the 7th century, where we have this very basic, but still very Roman in spirit succession of a cold room with cold pool, a tepid room or tepidarium, and a caldarium with 2 single-person pools. And this is actually what we also see in the Islamic baths of Volubilis, or Walida called at that time, of the 8th century. We still have this cold room with presumably a cold pool here, then a tepid room, and then a cold heated section with 2 perhaps pools or possibly also shallow basins for water ablutions. And so actually these were actually the last types of newly built baths that were included in this study, and show nicely the transition and the continuation of certain architectural features, of certain technological features, of certain social features from the late antique period into the Islamic phase. So I'll conclude my very brief and very hastily overview of the book and for the main results of the book here. So we still have some, I hope, some time for questions. I think that was one of the main reasons also for creating this round table. See if one of the members of the panel have any questions to kickstart the discussion, perhaps. We have some I don't see any questions yet, so please, please do not hesitate to ask anything about one of the...
There was a question in chat.
Aha, yes. So I'll just read the question. So it's about the baths as meeting places. Did those meeting places take place because they were just spacious and convenient, or is there evidence that some bathing activities were linked to such meetings? The gathering, the gathering in the baths of the Frère Vrouw and to the sacrifice of the Diadia. I can think of some of the examples in the ancient literature in Christian authors, for example, where some of the social gatherings were actually linked to bathing. I can think of an example where some students, a fraternity of students, had this rite de passage inside the bathhouse, where the newly elect member of the student fraternity had to bang on the doors of the bathhouse before he could enter, and then once he entered, he had to go and have some special initiation rites. Other social gatherings, there are some passages that pertain to, for example, Easter being celebrated, so the traditional time for baptisms, and which has been interpreted that some of the pools were actually used to perform baptisms. For the example, like for example, the Ecclesiastical Congress, I don't know, I don't think it will have had something to do with actual bathing practices, and that in that case, it perhaps maybe more the rooms, the spaciousness, the fact that a lot of people could gather there at the same time. I don't know if any other members of the panel or perhaps someone in the audience has some further remarks or...
Well, if I may, there was, of course, a tradition in Roman baths for going to a lecture or hearing a poet read from his newest work. So there might, in this sense, there might be a lot of continuation anyway. So the idea to meet in the baths for other social activities apart from bathing is I think, a feature from the start. But it's interesting that that's in Christian circles, this continues, and confirming again that for many Christians, going to the baths was part of their lives. As, for example, Tertullianus and other Christian writers tell us. So there is not this separation in early Christianity between Christians and non-Christians. Going to the baths was part of anyone's habit.
Yeah. I think there's also an important point raised by the very interesting and helpful book by Michel Blonsky, that bathing was also part of your civic duty, presenting yourself to the community as being well-groomed, as being presentable. It was something that you had to do as a good citizen, and this is probably something that did not change with the introduction of Christianity. Those ideas of being a well-civilized member of society, it included going to the baths and make yourself presentable, go to the baths to meet other peers, to go and be seen also. I think this did not change with the introduction of Christianity. Okay, any other perhaps I'll kickstart then with a small question to Nathalie de Haan about your presentation. I found it very interesting that you said that the central baths in Pompeii were actually built on top of former private houses. So this is perhaps private space within the city that was given back to the public. Is there any?
Yes, well, unfortunately, we don't have inscriptions or other written material that helps us with this very pressing question, because we do have evidence at some spots, not only the one I showed you, that there were atrium houses before the baths were built in this very last period of Pompeii. Actually, to be honest, I was hoping for a Hellenistic bath building, but there was atrium houses only. But I didn't have the time to show you, but on the east side of the insula, the street was even narrowed. So so the plot for building the baths was actually a little bit extended to the east, and this is the only information we have which makes us think that somehow the authorities were involved, because taking locus publicus, taking part of a public street was not something one could do as a private citizen or entrepreneur. So that's but again, alas, we don't have inscriptions or other or graffiti or clues that hint at who commissioned the baths, who. So probably, yeah, the city of Pompeii, but that's it. And for the rest, well, of course, we couldn't excavate to a large extent, but what we have seen in our trenches, there was a lot of well, rubbish, so material brought up from ruined houses, probably after an earthquake. I'm underlining an earthquake, because there is this tendency to ascribe every damage in Pompeii in the last period to this 62 earthquake that was reported in some written sources, but we might expect more earthquakes shortly before the eruption, so in this very last phase. But anyhow, ruined houses and the debris was used to level the insula in order to build the central baths. So that's what we can tell about previous previous buildings.
Any other questions in the chat? No, not yet. Yeah, what I also found interesting, Nathalie, that you mentioned some clues for specialist bath builders with another team working on the shops. This has also been suggested for late antique baths in Valesio, which have been excavated by the Dutch teams as well, but without definite answers. But this could also be very interesting in regard to late antique baths, that in some cities at a certain point they were cut off of this knowledge of these specialized teams. What are the exact what is the exact evidence you have for this these specialized teams? Is it only the brickwork, or as you mentioned?
The brickwork is an argument, and of course this is an hypothesis and not something we can really prove. But we do have some clues for looking at the measurements, that the standard food that was used was slightly different compared to the shops, and the shops on both on the north and the west side of the insula more or less follow the shops that were there already before the baths were built. So so that made us think of 2 possible workshops, and then the logical thing would be to suspect to have a local building firm to do the regular things like building tabernae, and the more specialized work, also the brickwork for the furnaces, for the pryphonia, for example, is not the average construction found elsewhere in Pompeii. So this made us think of a specialist workshop working on baths. But the weak point of this argument is, of course, that we're in Campania, and Campania is the region par excellence for novelties in building baths. So it's an hypothesis, but I must admit that that we have no proofs.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I would love to hear from other colleagues in the audience if they know of similar situations where one can distinguish in both building material and somehow the layouts of bath buildings that might allow for such a hypothesis.
Yeah, I remember that in Valesio as well. It was not. It was only a hypothesis, and it was not really. Yeah, it was not really substantiated, the claim. Else with questions or no more, unfortunately, no more questions, not from the audience.
I would like only to finish, or maybe not finish, I don't know, by stressing the importance that might not seem such to people who are not dealing normally with late antique buildings in Rome. Importance of point out the semi-public function of some bathrooms. I see this function evident where looking at the plans that you added to the book, the of late antique baths in North Africa, for example, where the ruins are very well preserved and all the layout of the baths and the close house or dwellings is visible. This is not the case for most of the evidence that we have in Rome, and really, and what has been done in the last years is to turn previous interpretation of a late antique house into a late antique baths, or the contrary. Instead, I think now there is this new possibility of recognizing house plus or house plus baths opening, but also public in the sense that they were opening also to the public, to outside, and this is really interesting, and this is something we knew from sources, but that it's interesting to really visualize on the.
Yeah, because some of the larger private baths in Rome, like under Palazzo Valentini, are extremely large and well equipped, and one could easily imagine that they also had a street access. We don't know it. We know it's attached to a house, but we don't have the connection to the street. And it could be that there was a connection to the street, and that is, for example, this is one of the cases that comes to mind in Rome. And we have also Francesca published a debate on the Colle Oppio, where we also have this idea that it might have been actually a semi-public bathhouse rather than just a private bath. And it was often thought in previous studies that when you had a small semicircular pool, even protruding onto the street, that yeah, it must have been a small private bath connected to the late antique house, and that's where also the idea of the privatization of bathing habits in late antiquity came from. But then if you go look at Ostia, you have these small, on the Via Severiana, I think it is, on the littoral coast, these small bathhouses that actually were public and that actually had a public entrance from the street, and that were also with these small semicircular pools protruding onto the streets. And we actually have several on the road there, and it might be some kind of a competition there going on this very important traffic artery in late antiquity. And so we can indeed ask the question for very densely packed urban centers where we only have this small window of opportunity to excavate, and we do find small pools and part of a small hypocaustum. Were these actually standard private baths, or should we also keep in mind that these could have been public baths, small public baths, whether or not attached to a house? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think we're way past our time yet. Perhaps we can conclude here. If there are no further questions, then I would like to thank you all the participants, all the speakers, and all the people who participated in joining us today. Sorry for the inconveniences due to technological problems, but I think this is something we'll have to deal with in the coming months and in coming academic conferences. I hope this conference can also be put integrally online afterwards, perhaps with some editing of cutting out the awkward silences. If no one else has a question, then I'd like to thank again the Academia Belgica for the technical support as well. And I hope to see you all soon here in Rome or on another conference on Roman baths and bathing habits. And if I just looked at the attendance throughout this evening, bordering the 50 people, I think it's still very relevant. Interesting. 44. Yeah. So that's it's a nice number, even for Friday evening at the end of a long work week. So I think there's definitely there will be definitely other occasions to gather as bath enthusiasts, whether it be online or preferably in person. Okay, so thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much.
Delightful evening and for these very stimulating and interesting talks. And hope to see you soon.